Morning, guys. How are you?
Good.
Alan.
Right, let's get into it. I mean, I don't know what value there is necessarily in analysing the game per se, because like you could talk about team selections or tactics or whatever, but we were firmly, resoundingly beating out the gap. And hard to imagine that there was any team, we were making the point earlier on, any team in that last eight, or indeed maybe a few beyond them, that we might have actually been in position to beat given our performance on Saturday.
Yeah, they were very good. That was pretty obvious to see. Unfortunately, unfortunately, Ireland just added to their brilliance and made them look better at times, because we lost all the collisions. We lost the accuracy wasn't there, and they targeted the ball, and tactically they put in a brilliant performance. I think you always talk about skills and individual brilliance with New Zealand, but I think the game plan that Steve Hansen and Ian Foster implemented the other night really, it troubled Ireland to the point that Ireland's defence was quite narrow, expecting a lot of physical collisions in around from the ruck out to maybe the 13 channel, and they never really hit in there until on occasions they did when they got into the 22. But the width they put in the game and the passing, it just stretched Ireland, and they couldn't get the ball back off them. And then when they had the ball, Ireland, they weren't able to build any sort of pressure. So we have to go back to see where we were in 2018. We were the ones who were the aggressors. We were the ones who were making the dominant carries, tackles, clean-outs. And, you know, people thought our game plan was fantastic. The reason now, and the reason the game plan has been analysed, is teams have said, right, first of all, against Ireland, win the collision, slow them down, get in their faces, and they don't have that individual brilliance to cut you open, which, you know, a couple of the top teams have. The Fijians, the New Zealanders, the Australians, some of the individual stuff, some of the English players. You'll always get a couple here and there, but we don't have too many who you can give a ball in a backfield and say run upfield and cut through a defence, do something brilliant. So our efficiency of what we did in 2018 was fantastic, but we haven't evolved. We all expected something different, some more variety in the game. And I know the ambition, and people speak about, well, the players don't want to play and they're afraid to take risks. I think, you know, if you go back to the way Leinster played, Joe hasn't come into Ireland and completely said, right, don't offload the ball, don't pass the ball, just run into brick walls. I just think what they did, which was really effective in 18, they continued to do, and they didn't change. And that's where the failing has been. And the other failing has been not changing some players who their form for going back to January. You know, England hit us with a kind of a brick wall. We thought we'd recover a bit. We did slightly in Scotland, but we were really poor in Italy. Better again against France, and then really poor in Cardiff. So the Six Nations was the warning shot, really, that needed to be more change. And I know, Adrian, for myself, people probably want me to lambaste the team and go after them individually and personally, and I don't think that's right. I think the players' efforts and their passion for trying to get this right, and it's the biggest game of their lives and the biggest tournament for a lot of them, and they'll never get the chance again, some of them. But I just think collectively there's been a shortcoming in form, in accuracy, in some of them look very heavy-legged, and those warning signs from the Six Nations continued on to Twickenham. And again, you know, we analysed that, we cut that open, we looked at it. It was after a heavy block in Portugal. There was improvement in the Welsh games. We were brilliant against Scotland. Did that flatter us? Probably it did now when we look at it. And then you get another warning shot against Japan that there's trouble, there's psychological damage done here, there's mental issues as regards. And you know, I said, in fairness to Conor Murray and the senior players, you got to try and rally the troops and circle the wagons and hope. So they were there in hope as well that there's that big performance is there. But I did a piece on Saturday, and I'm not kind of gloating that. I just highlighted the fact that the stats and numbers in November 2018 against New Zealand, meters made, carries by individual forwards, was way higher than it has been for the last 9 months. So it kind of does tell its own story. But Joe backed him, and fairness, and part of me, if it worked out and we had a better World Cup, you say, amazing, brilliant. He got the characters going, Peter O'Mahony, Rob Kearney, Rory Best, Cian Healy, guys who were, we've 9 players who are 30 or over. So there's miles on the clock there, and they've achieved an incredible amount.
Yeah. And
Joe did back him. If it worked, we'd say amazing. And, you know, I did say at the start of last week, I thought Larmour and Clyde Byrne and maybe Rhys Ruddock should be thrown into the team. Chris Farrell, Robbie Henshaw was rusty against Samoa. Maybe Chris Farrell should have started. I don't have a, you know, looking to crystal ball and saying all these things should have happened. But ultimately, the collective group just lacked energy. And going back to the right at the start, what you said to me about New Zealand, I think the way New Zealand played the other night, and I heard Sean Fitzpatrick say it, and to be fair, he's someone who has a pretty good knowledge of the game. He said that was the best New Zealand performance since the 2015 World Cup final. So we got them at a terrible time, and they got us at a great time. Yeah,
it doesn't make it feel any better. The 4-year plan, I know, like Alan's talking about the sort of potential, you bring in this player, you leave that player out, but I mean, I don't know how much of that would have changed things necessarily. Like the 4-year plan that Joe Schmidt has beat the drum about for the last 4 years, about creating that depth, that we didn't leave ourselves in the position that we were in 4 years ago. And it was slightly different to that. We had all the available players that we would need. He himself said afterwards that they were maybe too focused on that quarter-final, that post beating New Zealand 2018, that was the only focus that they had, that maybe to a degree they forgot about all the things that got them there. Do you see any merit in that?
Yeah, and he was even saying, you know, after the Six Nations, I think Rory Best referenced it in a few interviews about the Six Nations wasn't their focus, and it kind of was sweeping the results under the carpet. And I think as supporters and as pundits, we weren't even overly concerned with the results so much as the performance and the continuing to play in the way that we were in 2018, which was quite successful, but in a way that teams were starting to find us out. So it's like we just kept hammering at it instead of evolving or changing. Like Alan said, we kept hammering at what worked for us previously. And I definitely take on board what Alan said there about meeting the All Blacks when they're at their best, and we were very much underperforming. Definitely our worst performance of the World Cup, probably our worst performance of 2018, coupled with that warm-up game against England, which was also pretty catastrophic. What I'd like to ask Alan actually is, we mentioned at the beginning there about styles of play, and you know how we don't necessarily have the game breakers, or we don't at the moment don't play the style where like Fiji or the All Blacks, where you can just, someone can throw an offload to create an overlap. Is it because we don't play that way underage, or it's not the way Ireland aren't coached that way, or we don't play that way as much in the provinces as they do in some of the other countries? And then obviously, like, it's not just you don't just rely on one player like a Jordan Larmour to come in and stip 5 people. It's kind of a mindset of the team, because if you're playing that offload game, you need players who are obviously going to run an offload channel, as opposed to the way we play, which is run to clear out a ruck. You know, there's a lot of little minor details around that. If that's a game you're going to play, that, you know, you've turned over a ball and you're 22, yeah, we're attacking, we're putting this through the hands. It's a different mindset to always playing that controlled rugby. So is it that we don't necessarily have the personnel, or for so long we've played a different style that it's obviously impossible to just switch mid-game?
It's a bit of both, Louise. I think after 2015 World Cup, no Northern Hemisphere team in the semi-final. South Africa, Argentina, New Zealand, Australia. I wrote a piece after that, and I tried to analyse and look at why that was the case. Were they being rewarded because they have that ambition, because they have that free-flowing style that is very, very common in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina were playing a great brand of rugby and width in their game. Is it a case of, you know, whether because of the weather here and because of the style in the Northern Hemisphere is to kick a little bit more, maybe keep it tighter? It probably is, because when kids are there, they run around their bare feet. They're playing sevens. They're throwing the ball around all the time, and it is a case of sometimes it's a case of individual brilliance as well. If you look at Semi Radradra for Fiji, he was just sensational to watch. Someone like that, every time he goes into contact, Nakarawa as well, the second row who plays with Racing, we all know him from Glasgow. Every time he goes into contact, he looks for an offload. It's just in their DNA as well. New Zealand had 16 offloads the other night. We had 2. The stats lie a little bit because we were always going to get a bit more possession when the game was won. So the possession stats say it was 50-50, but they had 16 offloads, we had 2. You would think that with the game nearly gone that we probably would have thrown caution to the wind a little bit more and tried to offload out of the tackle. So it's kind of going back again to what worked so well, whereas, you know, you can offload much easier in wider channels. And if you run one-on-one with the person with space on either side, and you go through the gap, and that person has to tackle you by the legs, well, you can pass out of the tackle then if somebody has the anticipation to run off your shoulder. Whereas I just think with this group, and it's not something that's planned, it's just because they're very, very effective, and it's the type of personnel you have, that they're just very, very efficient at what they were doing, and we run into a lot of heavy traffic. New Zealand avoided the heavy traffic and the heavy collisions with Ireland the other night. I watched the game in 2016, and that's where we beat them up in the first 20 minutes. We turned them over, we won penalties, we smashed them. James Ryan and Toner hit Retallick, you know, drove him back about 10 yards. The crowd were going wild. They avoided all that stuff. They knew there'd be a very noisy Irish crowd there. They just went wing, wing, wing. And the space opens up then. And after a number of phases, guys can make decisions and see what's in front of them. So if you practice something for so long, you can't just switch over and do something that's alien to you. And that is an issue. So it comes from probably a young age, but also with the way we play the game in the Northern Hemisphere.
For both of you, structurally, like the RFU have obviously devolved a lot of responsibility for the national team to Joe Schmidt in terms of like player management and a lot of things that might traditionally have been looked after higher up the food chain. How far up the food chain does responsibility for this go? Like, does David Nucifora, for example, just get to say, well, look, it was over to the coach and it's not my problem, because I'm sure there's going to be plenty of internal review from an RFU structure on this. How far up that tree does that responsibility go?
I guess when you take the plaudits, David Nucifora's been obviously very well regarded what he's done in terms of the national game and where the squad have gone in terms of world ranking and who they've beaten. So I guess as Joe Schmidt's line manager, for want of a better word, he'll probably have to take some of, you know, a bit of a review of his own performance. But you'd imagine that happens regardless of the result anyway. Yeah.
What do you think, Quinny?
Well, look, I think David Nucifora has done a very good job because it's probably the best prepared team. There's guys that have been moved around provinces. Joey Carberry's a prime example, getting more game time, send him down to Munster and develop him more. So I think, look, I think there's a lot of good stuff going on. I just think our cycle is come to an end with a lot of these players, and they've been incredible. Like someone like Rob Kearney, I genuinely feel, and there's a lot of people who want to stick the boot in, and that's fine, they're entitled to do that. I just think it's hard to stick the boot in someone who's been so incredible and has achieved so much. But the reality is, he hasn't done it as well as he's done it before. In Chicago, before the game in Chicago, he was being written off, and he responded there. He's probably had an incredible 2 or 3 years since then. But our age profile is too high in this team. So I think David Nucifora, Andy Farrell, they've got to find young players now and promote from the 20s and get them in there. And Joe did that. Joe did that after 15. He capped a huge number of players. In 2018, he brought in Larmour, Porter, Levy, James Ryan. James Ryan was brought straight into the team. He never played for Leinster. So he cannot be accused of trying to bring young guys in. There's certain positions that the players aren't there. There's a couple of positions that you couldn't say, well, there's people being left at home that it should have been on the plane. And you know, there's a couple of areas within the squad, and that's probably the back three where Conway and Larmour were so good against Scotland, and they bring that little bit of X factor that we're talking about, Louise, that little offloading ability, that dancing footwork. And maybe Joe should have thrown caution to the wind and said, right, I'm just going to go with them. He was probably nervous that if you put them in against the All Blacks, are they going to just kick the leather off the ball and target Larmour? You can't cover every base. He went the other way with the experience, the character, the resilience. And it didn't work. So they've got to rebuild again.
Yeah, I suppose when we're looking at this rebuilding, do we go back to the style that we're used to playing and continue to mould players to play that style and look to compete and win Six Nations, but in 4 years' time we come to a World Cup again, and particularly against the Southern Hemisphere teams who, when they're really peaking for a World Cup as opposed to in a November test at the end of their season, we potentially come up short again? Or do we risk, coming in the bottom half of a Six Nations for the next 2 or 3 years and trying something completely new, like a slightly more adventurous, slightly more risky offloading game? Because certainly if you're going to change tact, you're not going to have success straight away. You're going to falter initially. Yeah. So do you do that now with the... And I know we don't have a complete new slate, like Andy Farrell is being promoted to head coach, but Alan, what do you think? Do you think we change tact, or do we keep going the way we are?
The Six Nations, Louise, is not a tournament that you can just go, well, we're going to put out a lot of from the under-20s and lose each game, because you just can't do that. It's a very valuable and important competition. I think New Zealand, people talk about the amount of players that they bring through and stuff, but they have a conveyor belt of options. They brought in George Bridge and Sevu Reece this year into the All Black setup, and they've been sensational, the two wingers. But they were sensational for the Crusaders. So if there's two young players come in and play for Leinster in Europe this year, and they're brilliant in December, and they stand out against top teams in Europe, they should be brought straight into the Irish setup. And Joe did that with Larmour, with Ryan. Less so with Ryan because he hadn't played. We had a summer tour 2 years ago to Japan, USA, and that was 18 months ago, and that was probably planned to develop some of these guys, get them out here as well, and bring in some more young fellas. So it's easy to say from me, maybe, or other people to say, cast 7 or 8 guys out and just bring 7 or 8 in, because nobody, like Ireland, would have planned to get this right. And if the World Cup was 12 months ago, well, who knows where we'd be now and what we'd be talking about today. It's just, it hasn't worked because I think too many of the players at one particular time, and maybe the highs of 2018, we maybe got a little bit ahead of ourselves and thought that we're in a place that now we can consolidate and keep, and that's going to take us through. Where, a lot of top sports people say when you win things, it gets harder, and it does get harder. I personally, European Cup in 06, we went out in the quarterfinals next year, massive review. What the hell happened? Sometimes it's just a couple of percent or a small thing in your head, and a couple of people thinking it's easier than it's not. We went back to the drawing board, and we changed the way we played in 08, and we brought in some players. Doug Howlett signed, Maffey, Tupoki Maffey was there in 06, Tupoki comes in, and we can. So you don't need to make massive tweaks. I just think we need to find some of that young, energetic talent who can come in and reinvigorate the group again. And it's a rebuilding scenario. This is about building again for the next 4 years. It sounds like, I think probably 2 years out, you just play. You don't play guys for the sake of it. You try and bring people in if they're good enough, and hopefully they can build up some experience. And you'd love to be going to the next World Cup in France with some experience, but with an age profile of 26, 27, 28-year-olds who are in their prime. And unfortunately, too many of our guys were in their prime a year ago.
Yeah, probably caught ourselves a little bit short on that front. So in terms of Andy Farrell then, Louise, obviously he's coming into it and he's been operating to Joe Schmidt's style. You've identified it there yourself in terms of that, conservative rugby, I suppose, might be the way to put it, in terms of we weren't that encouraging of an offloading game. So it's probably difficult to judge Andy Farrell too much within that, because he was obviously working to somebody else's style, and presumably he had his input, but he was ultimately working to somebody else's style. So what are you expecting from him now once he gets his feet under the table, and whoever the personnel are in terms of style? What are you expecting, or where should we go? Who knows?
Yeah, well, I suppose he's quite known for obviously being the defence coach, and Ireland were an excellent defensive team and brilliant tackle percentages, but that certainly dipped a lot in that Kiwi game. So whether he'll hold on to that and bring someone in who's going to look more at the attack side of things, but obviously he'll have the final say. Like Alan said, we're not going to just flip all of a sudden to become Fiji, and I don't think we've any semi-Radrajas growing up in County Clare that are going to appear on the scene. So we're not going to completely go away from what we know and from the players that we have. But what we do have is a very good provincial system, and with David Nusafor as well, the way he has managed players, we have players playing in competitive places all over the country and playing in Europe and in the Pro 14. So I guess it's going back to the drawing board with that. I mean, the RFU of the structure for younger players, and that'll hopefully be the future down the line. But looking in the next 4-year cycle, it's trying to get the provinces, making sure that they're performing, because that's going to be the pathway up. In terms of style then, well, I'm not going to tell Andy Farrell how we're going to play, but maybe we do need to start looking at slightly a bit more adventurous, a bit more of that kind of positive rugby, because we see it's so difficult to defend when you're getting that ball to space early, and when you're offloading the game, when you're shifting the point of contact. Like, a lot of people spoken about how the Japanese have played, and we're not going to become Japan, but we're not actually a massive team in terms of physical size, so playing that attritional brand of rugby, it is quite fatiguing. And maybe as well in a tournament format, that's a little bit of maybe another slight reason why it didn't work as much, because you're asking players to put their body in the line. And I know we've the Six Nations, but that's still over 5 games over 7 weeks. We're talking about 7 games here if we wanted to win, want to get all the way to the final. Maybe we need to just shift it around a little bit more and play to space, play width, and come away a little bit from that real, maybe slightly one-directional, everything going through 10, everything going through Johnny. We've seen a lot of teams are playing this kind of double playmaker role, and we don't seem to use that as much in terms of using our centres or using our full-back as a bit of a playmaker. Maybe we need to start to putting players into those spaces, like a Joey Carberry at 15. Yeah. So that's another aspect or another way we can go down, because that certainly puts a dampener on teams' line speed when they're not sure at a centre field ruck which side of the field you're going to attack. Yeah.
Keep them guessing in a way that we haven't done up to now. You're staying on for the duration, Quinny?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm really excited now to talk about New Zealand and England on Friday morning with you, Adrian.
We're pumped. We're all pumped. We're pumped for that one.
I feel a little better today. I went to a shrine here in Shinjuku in Tokyo, so I had a little bit of a reflection, and it's not the end of the world, and they'll hopefully regroup and get back, and that's the nature of sport. And unfortunately, life moves on, doesn't it? Fortunately, life moves on. The players have to live with this now. So I do feel for them, and I feel for Joe as well. And look, they have to take, as Louise said, you take the criticism with the plaudits, and it's just a massive disappointment. And there was mistakes made. We can't hide away from the fact that there was mistakes made, but life moves on, and hopefully it'll we'll get going again.
I can't let you go without asking you what sort of a shrine you were at.
It was the Meiji Shrine, it was called. It's the biggest shrine here in this area. Amazing. Loads of people leaving little messages on around this kind of special tree where you leave them there, and then it's taken into the shrine, and there's prayers said that night for it. So it's all a bit too complicated, but they're really nice. Loads of Irish people there today, so I went just for a little bit of reflection there.
Lovely. Did you leave a note?
I did.
You're not going to tell us?
It wasn't about rugby. Pardon?
It wasn't about us or about rugby. That's fair enough. Well, after that we can't.
Oh, it wasn't rugby. No.
That's fair enough.
I said my dad passed away in May, so it's more. There's more to life than rugby, but we're all disappointed. But anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. Beautiful. All right, Quinny, take it easy. We'll talk to him Friday. Come on, good luck. Alan Quinlan on the line there from Tokyo. He mentioned the semi-finals, like as grim as it is for us, and we're not that far after it. What are you thinking? South Africa, Wales, England, New Zealand?
Yeah, well, I think based on the 4 quarter-finals, it looks like the final is on next weekend on Saturday. New Zealand, England's going to be a massive game, and you're nearly like, who do you want to win? Are we a bit more vindicated if it is New Zealand? England haven't had to come out all guns blazing yet at this World Cup, whereas New Zealand did have that tough first 20-25 minutes against South Africa where they were really put to the pin of their collar, but again they thunked their way out of the game and started to put New Zealand on the back foot. Whereas England, obviously, that Argentina weren't at the races as much at this World Cup and didn't have to play France. And then, probably just after half time against Australia, they pulled away a little bit. So do we really know how good England are? I'm not sure we do, but they're pretty damn good. They seem to have a lot of clarity about what they're playing. Again, they have this dual playmaker role, whether it's Farrell Slade or Farrell and Ford, and so much power, so much beef. But again, New Zealand, I mean, how would you bet against them? How can you pick anyone to beat them at this World Cup? At the moment, I can't, because they seem to have all the answers. And I presume the two on the other side are just looking at that game, hoping that they leather the crap out of each other, and there's a whole pile of injuries, and because it does seem as if they are the two power players obviously left. Yeah, so. it's going to be an attritional game. But then the other side, I mean, Wales just stumbled into that final. I mean, to have a coach say the better team lost. And he gets a lot of stick, but to be fair, he absolutely fronted up there. Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible. It was a strange game. And then South Africa, I mean, we're all wishing and hoping Japan do well, and they started well. I mean, I actually watched back the 41-7 warm-up game that they played where South Africa won just before the World Cup started, and you could see how Japan would try and get around them, and they did valiantly try, but there's just too much power, too much beef there. And as well, Japan had rotated a lot, so I think they're a little bit of, I know we talked about their fitness, but I think a bit of fatigue crept in. But what's worrying for South Africa is, I mean, they have two explosive wingers in Mapimpi and Colby. They can't get the ball to them because they're two centres, Ukiana and Damon Delande. They are so physical, so brutish, brilliant defenders, but they're not creative. And then Willie LaRue is just not in good form. Like he butchered a few try-scoring opportunities for them yesterday. So when they can't just out-muscle, when they can't just win a line-out and maul a team over, they don't seem to have that level of creativity. They lost New Zealand. They had a facile victory in all the rest of their pool games. Obviously beat Japan, but they had one very simple game plan, and it worked against physically a smaller Japanese team. But I could see definitely Wales putting it up to them, because I expect Catalan to get them up for the semi-final. They're going to know they're got in by the skin of their teeth, and that's going to be a big battle for South Africa. Yeah, I think I'd take England winning the World Cup over Wales, to be honest with you. I'm not sure I could stomach that one. Really enjoyed your company this morning. Thanks for coming in. Enjoyed all that. We'll chat to you again, no doubt, before the World Cup is done. It's just almost 9:15 on this Monday morning. You're tuned to OTB AM, the Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball. We're going to be talking football next. We're going to be discussing all the Premier League action with Gary Breen.